Borderlands 4 is a complete joke. It is everything wrong with the modern day gaming industry. I was not planning on buying the game, but I did buy the game only to test it, only because I had so many people contact me asking me to make a video about the PC performance of this game. I spent just a little over $74 after tax on the standard edition of the game, and honestly, it's about one of the worst gaming experiences I've ever had, and I do not say that lightly. I played the game for exactly 2 hours. I wanted to make sure I got my full Steam refund, and I did get that, thankfully. And after 2 hours of gameplay, the game crashed on me somewhere between 6 or 7 times. I'll be honest, I lost count. Now, unfortunately, you will still have people on the internet like this guy right here on my community post who make these claims that everything's fine with the game, and anybody who's having these issues, it must be some kind of skill issue, because after all, everything works fine for him. We must have a bad tune on our hardware or a bad Windows installation. But I think this guy is coping, and the reason why is because, number one, when we talk about good performance, no, DLSS and frame generation and multi-frame generation do not count, and I will talk about why here in just a second. And number two, a 30-second look on the internet anywhere will show you the following. There's a group on Facebook called PC Gamers, and this guy posted this 17 hours ago. Got a 5080 and only get 60 FPS on max settings on the new Borderlands. WTF. And the very first comment under that is somebody with a 9800X3D and a 5090 playing at 4K, and they can only get between 60 to 80 FPS. With frame gen and DLSS, they get 180 to 200 FPS on high settings, not even the maximum preset. Next up, we can take a look at the Steam reviews, which we can see is currently sitting as mixed, which is never a good sign. And when we start to look at some of these comments and some of these reviews, you can see they're all complaining about the same thing: game optimization, game performance on their PCs. And then the website PCGamer.com even wrote a full article talking about how bad the game runs even on high-end hardware like a 9800X3D and an RTX 5090. And the article also talks about how PC gamers are pretty much very upset about this all across the internet. And because of all of this, it does have gamers questioning what is the point of even building a high-end gaming PC. And you know what? I have to say I agree with that. If you have watched my channel for any amount of time, then you know I'm a big fan of having people switch over from console to PC gaming. I definitely think PC is the place to play. Unfortunately, it is very hard to make that statement whenever you have games like Borderlands 4 coming out and running like absolute garbage on the highest end hardware. Now, with that being said, it also doesn't really run that well even on consoles. There's another reviewer by the name of Mostly Positive Reviews. He did a full review of Borderlands 4 with the PS5 and some PC specs, and he does a good job breaking down exactly how well the game runs on console, looking at performance mode and at quality mode. Long story short, in performance mode, it's actually somewhat respectable, and I wouldn't blame somebody for going the PS5 Pro route in order to save the money but still get a decent gaming experience. However, the moment he drops it down to the quality preset, you can see the game is running around 28 to 30 FPS. So again, not that great even on console. Now, with all of that out the way, today what we're going to do is take a look at my own independent testing. Now, because I was only able to play the game for 2 hours, I was only able to test 2 different GPUs. So we're looking at a high-end GPU and a lower-end GPU. I'm looking at the RTX 5090 and the RTX 3070. Now, the reason why I'm using a 3070 is because, number one, it is one of the older GPUs that I currently have in my possession. Number two, it also has 8 gigabytes of VRAM, which is still something that a lot of gamers have in their systems. And number three, the 3070 does not have frame generation or multi-frame generation, and it also uses an older model of DLSS. So if you're a gamer who has a GPU that cannot take advantage of the latest and greatest features from Nvidia, what kind of experience can you expect? Well, we're about to get into it right now. And by the way, I forgot to mention that both the 5090 and the 3070 will be paired with an AMD Ryzen 9950X 3D CPU. Now, first of all, I want to talk about my crashing experience. I started off with a RTX 5090, and in typical fashion, I went into the settings and set everything to the maximum preset, which here would be the badass preset. And I did notice that by default, it did use the TSR upscaler. I don't want to use upscaling. I want want to see pure raw native rasterization across the board. So I disabled that. And once I disabled that and I started playing the game, I barely made it into the game before the game crashed on me. And then after the game crashed, I got this message telling me that multiple crashes have been detected. The game has crashed more than once recently. Restoring default settings may fix the issue. And so then it asked me if I wanted to restore the default settings. I said yes. And once I was back into the game, I noticed that the graphics preset was now set to very high and the upscaling method was now set back to TSR. Now I don't have footage of this, but I did attempt to run the badass preset a couple of more times with upscaling disabled. And again, every time it just continued to crash on me. So I said, forget it. And I moved on. It is also worth noting that the game also crashed on me whenever I attempted to run 4K on the high quality preset, 1080p on the badass preset. And then one time it crashed on me while I was trying to change the settings. I wasn't even able to finish changing the settings before it crashed on me. And yes, this was all with a 9950X3D and an RTX 5090. And for those of you wondering, I am using the latest driver version for all of this testing, which at the time of all the testing was 581.29. And by the way, that is still the current version at the time of this filming, which is September the 13th, 2025. Okay, so what was I able to actually test? Well, I put everything on the very high preset and I disabled any form of upscaling for now. So this is native 4K on the very high preset. And as you can see, we are struggling to even hit 60 FPS with our 1% lows sitting around 45 to 46 FPS. The performance here is truly absolutely awful. This isn't even the badass preset because I couldn't run that because it kept crashing. This is just very high. Now let's lower the settings even more. Now this is native 4K on the high preset. And as you can see, we're finally able to at least touch 60 FPS, but we definitely cannot maintain it. And our 1% lows are still in the 40s. Again, not a great gaming experience at all whatsoever. Oh, and yeah, by the way, on this test run right here, again, native 4K on the high quality preset. Yeah, the game crashed on me before I could even finish my run. Now this is native 4K on the medium quality preset. And as you can see, finally, we're above 60 FPS. We're averaging around 74 FPS, give or take. And our 1% lows are a lot better, coming up to the mid 50s instead of the mid 40s. However, I think we can all still agree that for a medium quality preset on a $2,000 plus GPU, this is definitely lacking performance. Sure, definitely you can play the game and you can get through the game and maybe even enjoy it with this frame rate, but it still begs the question, what's the point of high-end hardware if this is all you can get on medium settings? Now let's take a look at native 4K on the low quality preset. And here you go. We're averaging about 91 FPS, which to be fair, if we were getting that on native 4K for the badass preset or very high preset, then it might be a little bit more understandable. But this is the low quality preset. I can't really set the settings any lower than this, and this is the best we can do. Okay, now I switched over and decided to try some upscaling. So now I'm going back to the badass preset, targeting a 4K resolution using DLSS set to the quality mode. And as you can see, we're averaging about 75 FPS with a 1% low of 30 FPS. Yes, you were seeing that correctly. With DLSS quality on the badass preset, targeting for a 4K resolution, we have a 1% low of 30 FPS while in combat. This is absolutely unacceptable. And so then I decided, hey, what if we still target a 4K resolution, but we keep it on the badass preset, but now we lower DLSS from quality all the way down to performance. Now what can we expect? And as you can see, while in combat, we are averaging about 83 FPS with a 1% low of 49 FPS. So definitely a lot better than the quality preset, but still definitely not acceptable. This is not okay. You can still see frame time spikes and stutters going on. And I mean, this is just so bad. You're talking about a GPU here that costs more than $2,000 and a CPU that is a $700 MSRP CPU. This is insane. And now let's try out some frame generation. So again, the badass preset targeting a 4K resolution, DLSS set to performance, and now we are enabling frame generation set to the X2 mode. And now, as you can see, MSI Afterburner isn't really set up to properly interpret frame generation. So the frame time graph is basically useless at this point. But you can see that the active frame rate and the average frame rate are considerably higher. You're talking about 145 FPS, give or take. However, the 1% lows are still struggling to hit 60 FPS, so that's definitely not good. I can definitely tell you this is a much more smooth experience, and so if I was going to keep this game in my library and play it, I would absolutely turn on frame generation at a minimum. But what about multi-frame generation? Now, this is all the same settings as before, but now we're enabling multi-frame generation and setting it to the X4 mode. And wow, as you can see, the frame rates are significantly higher, coming in over 260 something FPS, give or take, but your 1% lows are still struggling to hit 60 FPS. And so again, this is one of those situations where, yes, of course, if I was playing this game, I would absolutely use frame generation or multi-frame generation along with DLSS. But think about what you're saying here. You have a $2,000 GPU and you're saying, hey, turn on DLSS, set it to performance mode, and then enable multi-frame generation and set that to X4 mode, and your 1% lows will still not even hit 60 FPS. And the biggest issue here is that the community is still divided over these technologies. More and more gamers are starting to accept the use of DLSS and frame generation and all of that. However, a lot of gamers are still reluctant to accept these technologies and to use these technologies, and almost nobody in the community actually refers to frame generation or multi-frame generation as real true frames, because that is not what they are. It is a frame smoothing technology, and it does definitely make the experience more smooth for the gamer, but as you can see, the 1% lows are not really benefiting from this. Now, really quickly, I want to rapid fire through the rest of the resolutions. So I did native 1440p on the badass preset, and as you can see, we're averaging about 72 FPS with a 1% low still below 60 FPS, and that frame time graph definitely looks pretty bad. And now native 1440p set to the high preset, so we're skipping over very high and going straight to the high preset. And now things are starting to look a little bit more acceptable. Our 1% lows are above 60 FPS, actually getting closer to 70 FPS. We're averaging about 95 to 96 FPS. The frame time graph still could be a little bit smoother, and overall, this isn't really what you want to see on a $2,000 GPU, but still, it's actually a playable experience without having to rely on frame generation or DLSS. Next up is native 1440p set to the low preset, and our 1% lows are sitting around 88 FPS, and our average frame rate is around 130 FPS. And so definitely you could play the game this way and still not have to resort to frame generation or upscaling technologies, but still it is on the lowest quality preset. That is not really what you want to aim for with this type of hardware. Next up is native 1080p on the badass preset, and as you can see, 1% lows around 60 FPS and an average of about 85 FPS. That is definitely not good. Now, to be fair, the 5090 isn't going to be fully utilized at a resolution like 1080p, but still, we would definitely expect to see more than this. By the way, the badass preset on 1080p also crashed on me at the end of this run. Now switching over to native 1080p on the high quality preset. And as you can see, our 1% lows are around 78 FPS, and our average frame rate is around 112 to 113 FPS. So again, definitely playable, but also again, not exactly what you would expect to see with this level of hardware all the way down at native 1080p. And finally, we have native 1080p on the low quality preset. Now, no matter what the frame rate is here, it's unacceptable because we're having to go all the way down to 1080p and then set the graphics preset all the way down to low in order to hit these numbers. Sure, these numbers definitely look the best so far, especially from a native standpoint. But again, it's 1080p on low settings. Pretty bad overall. Okay, now we're gonna switch over and look at the RTX 3070. But before we do that, I need to address the elephant in the room. A lot of people will look at these benchmarks and say you're too critical. 1080p is not that bad. 1440p is not that bad. Hey, just enable frame generation. But see, here's the problem. On a $2,000 GPU like the 5090, you shouldn't have to play on 1080p low settings in order to have frame rates above 140 FPS. Additionally, even if you're okay with resorting to things like DLSS or frame generation, what happens if you have a piece of hardware that can't run those technologies? Like the RTX 3070, you have 8 gigabytes of VRAM and you have zero access to frame generation. Frame generation, multi-frame generation, that's not applicable to all gamers out there, which is exactly what Nvidia wants. And Nvidia wants you to feel like you're missing out on these technologies. Nvidia wants you to think, I'm going to go buy a 50 series card so that I can have X4 multi-frame generation so that I can have higher frame rates and a better experience in a game like Borderlands 4. But in reality, what actually needs to happen is developers need to stop using Unreal Engine 5 for every single game that comes out, and developers need to stop assuming every gamer out there is going to know to use DLSS, be okay with using DLSS and frame generation, or even have the ability to use DLSS and frame generation. And instead, they need to revert back to the days of old and actually take the time to test their freaking game before they put it out on the market. Now, if you have an RTX 3070 or something similar, this is what you can expect. 4K is absolutely out of the question all the way across the board. Let's start off simple with some 1080p testing. So this is the RTX 3070 on native 1080p with the badass preset. And oh boy, this is absolutely terrible. Let's see here. The 1% lows are around 3 FPS. Your average frame rate is around 22 to 23 FPS. And I'm honestly not sure if that frame time graph could possibly look any worse. This is obviously not a playable experience. Okay, now this is native 1080p on the high quality preset. And as you can see, definitely better than the badass preset, but still not great at all. Your 1% lows are around 17 FPS, while you're averaging around 38 to 39 FPS. You could actually play through the game like this and actually finish it, but it's still not a great gaming experience by any stretch of the imagination. And now we have native 1080p on the low quality preset. And here finally, we're actually getting close to that 60 FPS marker. We're still not hitting it, and we're definitely not averaging it. And our 1% lows are in the mid 20s. So still definitely not a great gaming experience. But what happens if we start to use DLSS? Okay, so here, this is the high quality graphics preset. We are using DLSS, and it is set to the performance mode. And we are targeting a 1080p resolution. And even after all of that, our average is only 60 FPS, with the 1% low still hitting between high 40s to low 50s. And so overall, this is probably the best way to play the game. Maybe you can even turn it down to medium or low settings while still using DLSS if you really need higher frame rates. But with that being said, that's about the best you can get out of the RTX 3070. And so as you can see, without the help of something like frame generation or multi-frame generation, you're really struggling here to have a great gaming experience. You can get by, sure, I'll admit that, but it's definitely far from great. All right, well, that was all the testing I was able to get to before my 2 hours was up and I had to request a refund for the game. But with that being said, I'm glad I was able to at least get this amount of testing done. But I will say this, I'll be honest with you, I don't like making videos like this. I used to make them all the time, but here's what I come to realize. You get a lot of views at first and then you never get views again, simply because over time, nobody's going back and looking at performance of games after they're a year or two old. Furthermore, ideally, performance will get better as you get updates to the game and then more driver updates for your GPUs, etc., and so on. And then also on top of all of that, these videos are very negative. I feel really bad after recording all of that and speaking ill of the game and the performance for this amount of time. But with that being said, things like this need to be called out. It is not okay for developers and publishers to keep raising prices on all of these games and then basically giving you a load of crap, because that's exactly what this is. And for all the people out there claiming things like, I don't have any issues, it runs fine for me, or this or that, look, at the end of the day, okay, great. That's cool if you're actually telling the truth, but just note that not everybody has access to frame generation. And also note, even the people like myself who do have access to frame generation, we don't want to necessarily have to rely on that for every single game that starts to come out from this point forward. And also, this is a pattern. Every time a new game comes out in Unreal Engine 5, it seems to be a broken, buggy mess that has a bunch of stutters and requires you to use DLSS and frame generation in order to have what should be a native experience. It's freaking ridiculous on so many levels. With that being said, I think I've made my point clear here. Let me know what you think down below in the comment section of Borderlands 4. Are you playing it? Are you going to pick it up? What hardware are you using? You know, all the things. Oh, and like I said, I don't really usually do videos like this anymore. So if you like it, let me know by hitting the like button, getting subscribed if you're new. And until next time, E-Rock out.